Good morning. This is the Saturday morning interview. My name is Geoffrey Onditi. The African Union has proposed that African states withdraws from the Rome Statute of 2002 that created the International Criminal Court (ICC). Here is President Uhuru Kenyatta.
In the face of mutating global terrorist threat that is costing us lives and great economic loss in the midst of playing our part in mediating multiple peace processes in our region, we have had to contend with an ICC pursuing weak politicized cases. This has become a huge distraction from our duty to serve our people and this continent fully. That is not what Kenya signed up for when we joined the ICC. I highly doubt that those of you that are its members expected this to be the way the court would conduct itself. As a continent and a union, we have sought to constructive engagement with the ICC and supported its reform. In previous decisions, this Assembly has supported amendments to Article 27 of the Rome Statute to align it to the norms of customary international law on impunity for heads of state. We have supported amendments to give effect to complementarity as a cardinal principle of the ICC. We will not and must not tire in this effort to reform the ICC. I therefore urge you to adopt the resolutions of the Ministerial Committee on ICC and include a new mandate to develop a roadmap for withdrawal from the Rome Statute as necessary. We must reaffirm that the global standard for impunity for heads of state should also apply to Africa and insist on the termination of the collapse cases against the Deputy President of Kenya. Together, we can make a powerful statement that reflects our refusal to be carried along in a vehicle that has strayed off course to the detriment of our sovereignty, security, and dignity as Africans.
Kenya is among African states whose citizens are being prosecuted at the ICC. But should African states withdraw from the ICC? This is our focus on the Saturday morning interview. Today, I'm speaking with Maurice Odhiambo, the President, National Civil Society Congress. Welcome to the studio, Maurice Odhiambo.
Thank you very much.
First of all, Maurice Odhiambo, what do you think about this proposal by most African nations, except Botswana?
First of all, the African Union is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. The Rome Statute, the signatories are, individual countries like Kenya, other countries in this region. I think all the countries are party to the Rome Statute. I think that what to me is going on seems to be, there's a lot of politics that is going on in the region, particularly when the issue of ICC is talked about. People have forgotten that the issue that we should be focusing on is actually not the ICC as an institution, but justice for victims of political violence, victims of other forms of violence.
So have African nations forgotten that?
In my view, African leaders, so now we should not talk about nations, we should talk about leaders. The leaders seem to have their own views of what should happen, and these views, in my view, always reflect their own interests. They do not reflect the interests of the people of Africa. I have not had any leader who has commissioned a survey to hear what the citizens are saying about this issue. Every time I've had interviews with ordinary citizens, they have actually said, no, if you get out of the Rome Statute, we are going to suffer, we as citizens. But the leaders, when they meet in Addis, they talk about their own interests, not the interests of the African people.
African leaders are representing their own interests. Why do you think so?
The fact of the matter is, let's look at the situation now.
Yes.
And I think the best example one can give is the situation in Burundi. In Burundi right now, ordinary citizens are being killed. Young people are being shot almost on a daily basis. When the African Union met, at first they made a decision to deploy a force to Burundi. And then it seems as if once the Burundi government signaled that it will treat that force as an invading force, then what basically happened is that they pulled back. What is happening in Burundi? People are being killed every day. When they went to Addis the last time, I personally thought they would concentrate on discussing the Burundi situation, where citizens are being killed every day. They did not. Instead, they discussed the leaders who are being taken to ICC.
Why did they forget to discuss Burundi? Very important.
Yes. And I'm coming to that shortly, because you had the president. He talked about the case against the deputy president. he never mentioned the case against Joshua Arap Sang. And it's very good that, ordinary citizens reflect on that. The issue here, and just to follow up with the question you have asked, is because African leaders only want to pursue their own selfish interests. They are not interested in the welfare of the African people. I keep giving this illustration that look at corruption in Kenya, for example. If the Kenyan state was interested in the welfare of the millions and millions of citizens living in poverty without any manner of services, they would not be looting their own economies. But look at what is happening around us.
Yes.
The NYS saga, the Eurobond affair, which somehow cannot be explained. All these corruption scandals are happening because the people we give power, the people, the bureaucracy, those who manage our ministries, for example, simply do not care about us. What they want from us is our taxes. Once they get the taxes, you people can go away and they don't care about you. This is
that
reflected.
A fair reflection
it is reflected.
Of African leaders.
It is reflected.
Because that is very local.
It is reflected in the whole of Africa. Most countries. Kenya is not even leading, for instance, in the Transparency International Corruption Index. You have countries like Nigeria, where corruption is basically a way of life. You have our colleagues in Tanzania. Fortunately for them, the new president Magufuli seems to be trying. But you remember that they have had major scandals, Richmond, the escrow scandal, and so on. So this theft is going on everywhere. Now, for me, that reflects very much across the continent and everywhere that we go, and also in all the institutions within the state.
The claim is that the ICC is targeting African leaders only. Why is it so? Because we've not seen leaders from other continents being targeted at the ICC.
Let's put it simply this way, because there's doublespeak, and it's good that we demolish that doublespeak. In fact, a lot of the so-called African leaders who have been taken to the ICC have been taken by African countries themselves. And the best example here is actually the president of Uganda, Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, who did not have any qualms having this guy who used to associate with the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army. His name is Ongwen. I kept forgetting his first name, to be taken to the ICC. Yet the same Museveni will come to Nairobi and start preaching against the ICC. What is Museveni doing? Simply playing politics. He wants to be seen to be a friend of Kenya because he has ambitions of being the East African president, God forbid. So he's engaged in doublespeak in that manner, that on one hand, he doesn't mind sorting out his own political problems using the ICC, but on the other hand, he comes and lectures Kenyans as if we are children, telling us how bad the ICC is. This is really nonsense.
Is that doublespeak according to your opinion?
That is doublespeak, and this is why we say these leaders are looking at their own interests. They don't care about others. If it is their political opponent, if this opponent is taken to the ICC, they will not even mention it. This is why our own president did not mention Joshua Arap Sang when he was talking about ICC in Addis recently, because Joshua Arap Sang is an ordinary citizen like me and you who can as well rot in jail as long as the key person who to them is the deputy president is acquitted from the ICC.
Maurice Odhiambo, why haven't we seen President George W. Bush being taken to the ICC?
Perfect. I've given this as an example in very many forums. When President George Bush visited Malawi, I think this must be some 2 years ago, we as the civil society protested and said the government of Malawi has to arrest this guy. This guy, in our view, was involved in many killings when he started unnecessary wars in Iraq, when he started unnecessary wars in Afghanistan. It is us, not the state, who were actually saying, arrest this man, he deserves to be in the ICC. African states, refused. The Malawi government completely refused. The president even commented about it and said something to the effect that Africans respect their guests, so they can never do something like that. Even when we keep saying that America is not a signatory to the Rome Statute. But let's not forget that when the court was created, the same America went round to various countries signing bilateral agreements that would ensure that American citizens are never taken to the ICC. That was done by African leaders themselves. They never consulted their people to know what they think about the issue, and they never even discussed it in their own parliaments. They simply got whatever bribes they got from America and signed up to those agreements. Even now, an American citizen cannot be arrested in many of these countries and taken to the ICC because of what the leaders signed up, not because the ICC does not want to prosecute this.
Why is it that most African countries rush to signing the Rome Statute?
I've often wondered myself. I think when we come to international politics, there are many, many aspects that may not be apparent to us, those who are not part of the negotiations. There are very many things that happen in negotiations. There are people who are there to secure their own personal interests. And I can assure you that people can be bribed to negotiate certain positions in the way they do. There are those who may not...
possible.
Precisely. There are those who may not even have the capacity to negotiate. They are not given these jobs because of their intellectual capacity. They are the relatives of so and so. And when they are going to international meetings, they are probably just going to do their shopping. So these people may not have the capacity to negotiate so that the interests of the country is taken into account when eventually you have an agreement. So all these are gaps that actually make African governments sign up things that later on they want to disown. This does not apply to the ICC situation. In the ICC situation, we're just being selfish as a country. The leaders are being selfish. They are basically saying the 1,333 Kenyans who were killed in 2007, 2008, their lives don't matter. They are nobodies because they don't have the big names like some of these leaders.
This is the Saturday morning interview. Today I'm speaking with Maurice Odhiambo from the National Civil Society Congress. Our focus is the proposal by AU states to withdraw from the ICC. What do you think? Should African states withdraw from the ICC? Share your comments on our KBC English Service Facebook fan page. Maurice Odhiambo from the National Civil Society Congress. Is it possible for African nations to create their own ICC here in Africa?
Courts are not an issue. Courts have been created. As I said earlier, we've had the commission in Gambia. There's a court here in Arusha. Even coming to the level of EAC, we have the East African Court of Justice and so on. So really, the institution is not the issue. The issue is that these institutions are never created to serve the interests of justice. Many times they are created just to show the international community that we are also at par in terms of respecting human rights. It's the same way we have Kenya National Commission on Human Rights here, and at the same time, we don't respect human rights. Why? Because when we are putting together these institutions,
yes,
the thinking is that we are making someone happy. We are making the West see that we respect human rights so that they can give us aid and so on and so forth. The issue is never that the African people will secure justice through these institutions. And many times, as we have seen in our own domestic sphere here, court orders are ignored left, right, and center. Just recently, we had a situation in Mombasa where the Kenya Revenue Authority basically ignored court orders to open the port facility that they had closed down. Now, it doesn't really matter whether the court is domestic or whether the court is regional or international. This same attitude of saying that we will ignore the court will still apply in all these situations.
So it seems that civil societies, you simply don't trust African leaders.
I don't think so. Actually, I think African leaders do not trust themselves. Because when you build your power not around serving the people, you see, you build a system that is very shaky. Why? Because a majority of your citizens are poor. There's huge inequalities in terms of living standards. You create a very fragile state, you see. So you do not trust yourself. Your institutions are not working. Your institutions, you don't want them to be strong because they will go against your interests. This is why if we had a strong judiciary, we wouldn't have this nonsense of court orders being ignored. Court orders are ignored because there are certain interests that have to be secured. You see, this is why a lot of our leaders do not want our institutions to be strong. And this is the problem that we have here. So it applies everywhere. We as Africans must not only trust in individual leaders. We must trust in the institutions that those leaders create. If they create weak institutions, it simply means that they want to rule by fiat, and so on. So we must be, I think, very, very careful as we engage in some of these issues.
So you believe that we simply can't trust our institutions to work, even if they are created?
Definitely need those institutions. And every day, even us as a civil society, when we're going through the constitution review process way back in 2010, these are the things that we were talking about. We were saying we need an independent judiciary. We need a Supreme Court which can exercise jurisdiction in certain issues that we have had problems with. We need an anti-corruption agency, and so on. But what has happened after that? One by one, these institutions have been demolished. Why? Because they are not serving the interests of those who are in power. Now, it's not as if there is something in the African that negates institution making. It's that our historical circumstances, the leaders have taken advantage of the fact that our institutions are still fragile to basically turn those institutions to serve only their interests. So this is not really about Africans. I think we should reshape this debate. This is about any country whose institutions have not developed to an extent that they can actually stand on their own without the kind of patronage we see from State House and from other centers of power.
And African leaders are saying that this is neocolonialism.
And African leaders, unfortunately, are killing their people. And their people have no chance to say that is neocolonialism. Now, that is the bottom line. Where do we put the line? Should we, for instance, right now, advocate for the international community to intervene in Burundi because the AU has failed? What is it that Africans should do in these circumstances? What if Burundi blows up today and tomorrow we wake up and 1 million people have been killed? Then what will we say? Won't these same leaders be the ones going to the West to beg so that the West can come and quell the situation? So we as Africans, we must then begin to respect ourselves and our own dignity. Let's not engage in doublespeak, that an institution is good when it is working for me. When it is not working for me, then it is not good and we can ignore it. If we have agreed to be part of an institution, then let's walk the talk. If we do not feel that we want to be part of that institution, let's get out of it. For example, there is really nothing. How many attempts has Kenya made? We had a parliamentary debate long ago, which concluded that, get out of the ICC. So what are we doing in Addis Ababa as Kenya? The African Union, as we have said, is not a party to the Rome Statute. It is Kenya, it is Tanzania, it is Uganda, and so on. So why the doublespeak? Why is it that today we are saying we are leaving? Tomorrow we are in Addis, we are trying to beg others to leave also. Why do we do that when they have their own unique problem?
Is it possible for Kenya to get out of the ICC as a state alone?
As I've said, if you look at the law of treaties, everything in international law is laid out. There is nothing to stop Kenya from leaving the Rome Statute. There's nothing to stop Kenya. But the problem is we have wanted to politicize the issue through the East African Community, through the African Union, through the Assembly of State Parties. Everything we have done so far as leaders, and I'm not talking about citizens here, everything the leaders have done so far is simply to politicize this matter so that they can get one of their own from the clutches of the court. Again, I remind you, even when the president was talking in Addis, one poor Joshua Arap son was not even mentioned because he's an ordinary citizen, he's not a rich man, and therefore it does not matter where African leaders are making their decisions.
When the president mentions deputy president, for example, and Kenya gets out of the ICC, doesn't it include all the citizens, including even the deputy president?
For whose interest? That is the key question. Again, we go back. Why is it that we signed up to the ICC? We signed up to the ICC because, one, we wanted to be part of an international instrument that can help to avoid the kind of situation we had in 2007, 2008. So really, whichever interests are at play here, when we discuss the fundamentals of the ICC itself,
Yes.
then we must look at the reasons why the court was set up. Now, if we want to deal with the politics of ICC, that one can be done at the Assembly of State Parties. Whatever we say in political rallies in Kenya, whatever it is we want to say in Addis, for sure, if you ask me, it does not add any value to this debate.
Now, the paramount question, how do African citizens get justice?
It is really the bottom line. And I've told you before that even this debate on ICC is completely, we have handled this debate in a very bad way. Why? Because the key question, why the ICC was formed, is because of mass murder. It's because of crimes against humanity. It's because of the kind of situation we have in the Central African Republic. It's because of the kind of situation we have now in Burundi. So the key question is, if our own institutions are weak, if our own institutions are corrupt, we are now talking about the allegations against Judge Tunoi right here, today. If our institutions are corrupt, and especially the judiciary, then where do weak and poor citizens get justice? Let's not worry about the rich, because they'll hire 20 lawyers. Their cases against the rich will go on for 20 years. You remember Goldenberg, cases that never end. So the question is, what about the poor man and the poor woman in our urban areas, in the villages? Whenever we have political violence, and political violence in this country has a long history from the early 90s. Thousands and thousands have lost their lives and property. When we have political violence, then where do we go? Because many times when there's political violence, the state is actually an instigator. Both the state and some non-state actors. For instance, the gangs that are formed by politicians. All these are the actors. So where the state is involved, the ordinary citizen will never find justice. And that is where the problem is.
Maurice Odhiambo from the National Civil Society Congress. The key question, should African nations get out of the Rome Statute?
As I've said, there is no question about African nations or the AU getting out of the Rome Statute. The key question here is, if individual countries want to pull out, the law, international law, allows that to happen. Number two is, what is the motive for this pullout? What we can see so far is that we are only dealing with the selfish interests of leaders who find themselves a fool of the ICC. We are not dealing with the interests of ordinary citizens. And it seems in this situation that the interests of ordinary citizens are colliding with the interests of the leaders. The leaders want a situation where they can practice impunity. The citizens want a situation where they are free and they can go about their business without worrying that someone will arm some militia to come and burn my house. So you see that collision in terms of the interests of the citizens and the interests of the leaders. If individual countries pull out of the ICC, then that will be the key question. Where will citizens go when they are being killed, when they are suffering injustices?
Do you really believe that African leaders are there to hurt their citizens?
Let's talk about Burundi. What is happening in Burundi? How many citizens have died so far?
They're also good leaders.
What is happening in CAR? How many have been crushed so far? What is happening in Ethiopia? How many citizens are trying to leave their country? Right now, as we speak, Kenya has become the main conduit for people leaving Ethiopia. They are leaving their country, and they are not irrational. They are leaving because of oppression. They are trying to find to go somewhere where they can go about their business in a freer way. There are many of them who are headed to South Africa. I'm really hoping that Kenyans will never be put in such a situation. What is happening in Somalia? How many Somali refugees do we have in this country? So this is proof that the ruling elites in these countries, in our countries, simply do not care about the welfare of the citizens. That is what it shows. And therefore, citizens will continue to be killed. Citizens will continue to be oppressed. Women in many of these countries will continue to be oppressed. And all the negative things that make citizens think that they should go to Europe, or at least they should leave their country and go to South Africa or some other country where they can find conditions that are more bearable for their own livelihoods. This is what will continue to happen. We will continue to have refugees. Burundians are living every day, hundreds of them. There's going to be a huge and even bigger refugee problem. When just recently we were trying to figure out how we can close some of the refugee camps, we are actually going to end up with even more refugees. So we cannot solve these problems when we have refused to build strong institutions that ensure the citizen that justice shall be observed.
And with that, we come to the end of the Saturday morning interview. I've been speaking with Maurice Odhiambo, the President, National Civil Society Congress. Till next week, my name is Geoffrey Onditi.